Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results. Hi, I'm Perry Holly, a Maxwell Leadership Facilitator and Coach.
And I'm Chris Cody, Executive Vice President with Maxwell Leadership. Welcome and thank you for joining us. As we get started today, just as a reminder, if you want to download the learner's guide for today's lesson, if you have a question or a comment, which I think after today's session you are going to, we want you to visit maxwellleadership.com/podcast, and there you'll have a form, fill that out, and our team will follow up with you. Well, we are super excited today. Not only a longtime friend and mentor of mine personally, but also for my wife and I, Sarah, Tim and Pam have been a part of our life for, well, we're not going to tell you how long because then it's going to age me, even though I'm the youngest one at the table. I told Tim as he walked in here, we're going to have fun today.
Yes,
we
are.
But we're going to talk about something that I think is really going to add a lot of value to leaders around the world and organizations, no matter the size of your team. Today's topic is extremely relevant. And what I'm excited about is as you're listening to this podcast, and we're going to give you at the end of our podcast how to find Tim's book, and it's out. And not only his book, but also we've partnered, and we're going to be doing some corporate training, and we're going to be coming alongside and working with teams on this topic. And so today's title is A New Kind of Diversity, a look at generational diversity. So Tim, welcome. Thank you for joining. We're so glad that you're here with us.
Great to be with you, both of you guys.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I'm excited too because I've been teaching over the years 5 generations in the workplace, and I thought I was doing such a great service, but I never thought about the way you've subtitled the book about competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. I love that, and I think I always presented 5 generations and generational diversity as something to be tolerated.
Yeah.
So another thing I really took from your book is that this is something to be, there's a lot of positive here, a lot of opportunity for competitive advantage. Can you kind of help us understand what's going on in the workplace when it comes to generations?
Well, Perry, I think there's an elephant in the room right now that's there. We all know it's there, but are not quite sure what the conflict is or the great resignation, what's going on here. I think a lot of it, not all, but a lot of it is these different generations that bring a different language and vocabulary to the workplace. You were talking about your granddaughter, you know, and so I think this book, I know, is designed to be an encyclopedia and a dictionary to really understand those 4 or 5 generations and leverage them. So the latest data tells us diverse workplaces help, meaning having various colors and ethnicities. Both genders help us. It's just more work, but we get helped if we have them. Mm-hmm. Same is true of this. If you got a 20-something, a 30-something, 40, 50, 60-something, 70-something, you're going to be better if you do the work to capitalize on them rather than tolerate them. Like you said, we've often just tolerated them. Say, those millennials, what's going on with them, you know, and we got to do better.
So we talk about these 5 different generations. I was like, no, there's not 5 different. And sure enough, some of our corporate partners that we work with and have worked with for a long time, you begin looking at it and you begin talking to their leaders and they go, oh, no, that's real. Yeah. Like we have, and I was like, so is that great grandpa? Like, you know, like, like what are they all? Well, no, they're not all necessarily related in the same family chain, but we have representation and different. And then how do you lead them to, as you talked about, right? They have a different language. They have different expectations when it comes to everything inside the culture. And as we've talked about on this podcast, the organizational culture is how we think, act, and interact inside a team. And if that's the case, you've got to know this. As Tim talked about, this is so important. Now, we know, let's start on maybe the not necessarily the negative side, but we know they can clash, right? We know that these different generations can clash. Why is that the case? And what's the why behind some of the challenges that leaders are feeling right now while leading teams?
I think there's a few big reasons, and I try to outline them in the book. But one is, whether we're aware of it or not, we began to really find a niche, generationally speaking, when the screens in our life went from public to private. So I grew up with one screen in our home, a TV, and in our case, you might remember a black and white TV. You know,
See, for those that are listening and not watching, he looked at Perry and said, "You remember those?" He did not look at me, so I am clearly not the same generation.
We had a remote control. It was me. Dad,
yeah,
change the channel.
That's right, exactly. So,
Yeah, that's a good
but
point.
think about it. Over
Yeah.
the years, we start getting our own screens. We get our own phones. Now we've got a portable device where a teenager can have a wholly different life than mom and dad. So mom knows her daughter has a Instagram account. She didn't realize she got 5 Finsta accounts, fake Instagram accounts, where she's developed personas.
Yeah, that's
So
interesting.
I don't know if you guys are aware of this. There's actually 7 generations alive and well today. So there's the senior generation, that'd be my Uncle Gene and Aunt Wanda. They're in their 90s, you know. Then there's the builder generation, that's my parents' generation. Baby boomers, that would be you and I, Perry, my wife and our baby boomers. And then there's Gen Xers. I think you're an Xer, Chris.
I am.
Then there's the millennials. We've been throwing them under the bus for 15 years now, right? And then Gen Z, the new kids on the block in the workplace that bring a hacker mindset and an entrepreneurial spirit. And then the alpha generation, which would be your grandkids. They're the youngest generation we're measuring. They're not in the workforce yet, but boy,
But they're coming.
whole new batch of kids. So I just think it's important to know them so we can say, let's help you become the very, very best version of yourself, because we created an environment where you can flourish.
That's good.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, something you mentioned in the book that I think most people would even understand. You talk about understanding the generation close to you.
Yeah.
I found that interesting. I think about on either side of me. So what do you call
The builders.
the builders? So
Yeah.
my parents, that group, and then understanding Chris was a whole. But why? Tell me kind of why, and then how do you do this?
Yeah.
How would you coach us to do that?
I would say first step in my mind would be to understand how our brain works in different stages of our life. I'm not a neuroscientist, but just studying for this book, there was a psychologist in 1971 named Raymond Cattell that first began to expose us to his research. In the first 40 years of our life, we experience mostly what he calls fluid intelligence. In the next 40 years, it's mostly crystallized intelligence. Now, it's not that we don't have both, but fluid is creative, it's innovative, I got energy, I got new ideas. Crystallized is more, I can summarize those ideas. I can share those ideas. Don't we get better at teaching as we get older? So let me cut through the fat and say, here's the deal. So if I welcome that fluid intelligence on my team from that 27-year-old and say, I welcome your contribution. I love to tell the story of Tony Palacino, the 20-year-old at Ohio University who worked at Sherwin-Williams. He got 1.4 million, this is in the book, 1.4 million TikTok followers because he's mixing paint on TikTok. He takes it to management and says, you guys should use this. They fire him. They fire him not only because they swear he must be doing this on company time, or he's stealing the paint or distracting customers, but they have no idea that maybe TikTok could be used to market to 1.5 million more people. So Tony, get this, Tony moves to Florida, starts his own paint company, he's got 2 million followers. I'm just saying that was a miss. That was a miss. So that happens to us as we age, and I'm just thinking if we can just let them be who they are, but guide them. So one more thing before I stop talking. I feel like we need to play the role we have. So I think we got to ditch the niche. That's my phrase.
I like it.
Notice the right words there. Ditch the niche. Okay. What I mean by that is we find ourselves going to people who are like us, don't we? They think like us. They vote like us. I'm telling you, when I can find that 20-something and say, I am sure I've got something I can learn from you, and maybe we can both learn from each other, we got to win there.
Hey, podcast listeners. Do you have a clear plan for growth? Achieving big results most often does not require big life changes. Small improvements over time compound into big results. Download the Maxwell Leadership app. It's the new free app where our expert guides and John Maxwell help you pace your leadership journey and set a clear plan for your own personal growth. You can also find all sorts of resources on the Maxwell Leadership app, including this podcast, information on upcoming events, and much more. Just search Maxwell Leadership in your app store and download the app today.
We talk a lot about being curious.
Yeah.
Right? And we're curious in things that well, we want to be curious in, like we want to know more about. But man, if we took the approach to your point of being curious about other generations, what could we learn? What could the culture become inside your organization as a leader if you modeled that? And I want to hit on something that Tim said, where Tim said as he's kind of studied for this book. I would tell you that Tim studies every generation. Tim is one of our thought leaders. I call him kind of the generational expert. Like every generation that's coming up, he has studied. And he's done groups together where they've all gotten together, and he understands it. So as he put this together, he is very aware of every one of those generations. Now, with that, and back in the day, we've heard a lot about this generational gap. Right? Yeah. And it wasn't always talked about in a positive way when you talk about that. So talk a little bit about the generation gap that is relevant or that leaders are dealing with that's actually out there that maybe has a stigma to it.
Yeah. Well, a guy by the name of John Poppy first coined this term generation gap way back in the 1960s when the baby boomers were the young whippersnappers and the older generation. I can't understand these kids today. They're burning buildings, burning bras. I mean, wasn't that true? I mean, my God, we thought the world was going to end in 1968. But what's funny is what goes around comes around. Now the boomers are the older generation. Well, kids today, you know.
Same thing.
Well,
right?
we've been saying kids today since Socrates. Literally, if you read what he wrote, kids are disrespectful. And I'm going, oh my gosh, this never changes. So here's something I want to point out. The age of authority is dropping today. Here's what I mean by that. If you worked in the 1940s, whatever job or task you were doing probably didn't change in 10 years. It's pretty much the same. If you worked on a conveyor belt, whatever, you didn't change the way you did it. Well, today, because the rapid pace of change and technology, the shelf life of a task, every 2 years you might go, oh, we're doing it differently now. Yeah. Did you not know that? I'm telling you, the young people get it quicker than we do. Let me just speak for me.
Point.
Yeah, so my kids are explaining technology to me. I bet your kids are too, Chris.
They are, yeah.
So that's why famously in 2007, Mark Zuckerberg says, young people are just smarter. Well, we all chuckled when he said that. We know what he meant. He meant he was on Facebook now creating this incredible world, and his 20-somethings seem to get it faster than the 50-somethings. But he later hires Sheryl Sandberg, who a lot older than him. Yeah. He realized there's something for both to gain. She brings experience and wisdom in hiring and managing. He brought the tech, put them together. We got a great platform here. So we got to look at it positively rather than negatively. Yeah.
Another thing we teach a lot recently is about, we call it the inclusive leader. And it's centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but really the eye on that. But you mentioned in the book, I found it very interesting about that there's a different view at the generational level around DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I was stunned, and I'm choosing that verb very carefully here, when 2020 happened and we began to see protest. And I was glad to see it wasn't just minorities, but, you know, mostly young adults of all over the world protesting. What stunned me was there was this division oftentimes in families between the parents and the young adult children that were angry with mom and dad because they didn't post a black square on Instagram or whatever. And mom and dad said, I'm for racial equality. I'm just not on Instagram, you know, or whatever. So it was an unnecessary divide when a lot of times, not all, but a lot of times, we did agree that Black Lives Matter and so forth and so on, but we just had this, just like another country, different language, different customs, different values. And it's like, I just flew to India. I need to learn what's going on here. And we didn't listen. We yelled, and unfortunately, and we screamed on Twitter and Instagram. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but I feel like there was an unnecessary gap that we could have solved had we done it differently. So here's the rule I'm following as a 60-something now. When I'm meeting with a young person, I want to speak as if I believe I'm right, but I want to listen as if I believe I'm wrong.
So good.
That's a game changer. I want to speak as if I believe I'm right. I think I am, but I want to listen to that 20-something or my own kids as if I believe I'm wrong. That was a game changer for Jonathan and Bethany when they thought, Dad's listening to me? You know, this author, you know? But I'm learning from them all the time.
All the time. Yeah. What I love about that is we talk about really two principles: the intent versus perception gap. And that ties into that. Like our perception of different generations,
Yeah.
which goes for the younger generation saying, hey, mom and dad aren't jumping on board. Well, they are. They're just not out in social media doing it.
That's
There's a gap there from a leadership perspective. This is happening in your office, in your work, in your place right now. And so you need to be aware of it. The other thing is we talk about that we need to lead people the way they need to be led.
Yeah, that's right.
And we never on here have said that leadership is easy.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, it well, I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is, right? But it's hard. And so the only way that you can really do that is begin to understand, man, how are they wired? What are their learned behaviors? What is their generation?
Yeah.
And that's what Tim's bringing to us today. And so, man, I can't wait. We'd love to have you back for another episode. If you don't mind, we're going to dig into a little bit more, some practical application and things about the book. But here is, as I wrap up, and then I'll throw it to you to close, here is your call to action. You have to get this book. And what I love about it is that Tim and our team not only obviously wrote an incredible book, but now we have an assessment.
Yes, I'm very, very excited about
to
this.
go along with this. And I know that in organizational health and development, people love assessments, and so our team did that. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to visit newdiversitybook.com, and there you can take the free assessment, which we're calling the GQ assessment, right?
You can see how fluent you are.
Do you like this, right? Here we go. And it's not because of what we wore today.
That's right.
Because
has nothing to do with a wardrobe.
The generational quotient is what we're going to be measuring in there.
I'm kind of GQ.
And it'll be fascinating. See how I blew right back that?
That's right.
It will be fascinating for you to take that assessment. More importantly, I want you to get this book, and not only for yourself, but for your leadership team. You have multiple generations in your workforce, and in order for us to achieve what we're trying to do as an organization, you've got to know your people. Yeah. And this can be a big divide, as Tim mentioned earlier, if we don't get our arms around this. Yeah. So, Perry, wrap us up, and then we will look forward to seeing Tim next week in our next
look forward to
podcast.
that. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining. Just a reminder, if you want to know more about the offerings that we have, if you want to leave us a question or a comment, especially if you want to talk about the generational diversity things you've heard today, we'd love to hear from you on that. You can do all that at maxwellleadership.com/podcast. I will put the link to the book and to the assessment that Chris just mentioned in the learner guide. So be sure to download that. We're grateful that you would spend this time with us. Thank you again. This is all today from the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast.